Now, you might think this is kind of a bizarre topic to go into. Why the fuck would I want to talk about despair? And there's actually a very good reason. Because this definition of despair impacts way more of us than we realize. It may even impact you without you realizing. So as I go into what despair really is, I will also be telling you how to overcome it and turn it into one of the most meaningful pursuits you could possibly have with your time here on this planet. So let's get going. What up, everybody? Welcome back to Operation Moksha. I'm your host, Chris Orozco, as always, and today we're going to be talking about Danish existentialist philosopher Soren Kierkegaard and his definition of despair. So first, I think it's important to go into a definition of what despair actually is. And Kierkegaard basically describes despair as existential dread and terror that you get when you feel like your true self will never really actualize on the material plane. And he describes this as essentially an inability to bridge the gap between the infinite and the finite. And in human terms, what this really means is when you lack the ability to take all the unlimited possibilities of who you could become and bring them into a finite structure with a hierarchy that is structured and organized and prioritized, and you can put all of your interests in a hierarchy based on how satisfied they make you, give your life structure and give you something to live for. That's what it means to be stuck in the infinite. And this happens to a lot of people that I coach. It's all too common to be overwhelmed and bogged down by all the different things you could become. I talk to people about this all the time, and they say, well, there's so many things I could do. There's so many things I'm interested in. There's so many things I want to do. I don't know how to structure it and organize it. And it creates this real sense of existential dread. And that's essentially what Kierkegaard is talking about, or at least one of the versions of it. The other version is when you are too stuck in the finite and you can't seem to bridge the gap into the infinite. This is usually what happens when people are kind of bogged down with the day-to-day. They're usually a little bit more logical. They're just really focused on what needs to get done, but they're not really interested in the infinite potential of who they could become. Now, these people, in my opinion, kind of have it a little worse because they have the opportunity to actually become really successful, really wealthy, build an incredible life. But then once they get there, they realize that it wasn't based on their soul. It wasn't based on their heart. It wasn't based on anything true and genuine within them. So they climb to the top of the mountain and they find that there's actually nothing waiting there for them. And for me, that would be pretty fucking terrible. This reminds me of a quote that I heard from Alex Graham when I went to go see him perform a few years ago. And this quote stuck with me for a really long time. And he said that there's two main things that can wake a person up to who they really are and get them on a genuine life path. And it's either you have such an intense string of failures that you really have to reanalyze how you go about living your life, or you have such an intense and high degree of success that is hollow. And so you climb to the top of the mountain, you see nothing waiting for you there. You realize that none of this is a representation of who you really are, and so that is another gateway to despair. Either one of these two is essentially a gateway to make sure that your true self never actualizes. You could be so stuck in the infinite of all the things that you could become, but you never create a finite structure of how to organize that in a really meaningful and satisfying way for you, so none of your goals and dreams and aspirations ever become actualized or manifest in the physical world, which I've had that happen before, and it really is a terrible experience. And on the other side, I even know a lot of coaches like this, where they build these amazing coaching businesses, they make millions of dollars, but it's completely devoid of anything soulful. And so they get to where they thought they wanted to go and have to rethink their entire lives and rebuild from the ground up. Now, why is it exactly that this creates the experience of despair? For me, the reason for this is because every single part of your personality, every single part of your psyche wants to be seen, it wants to be understood, it wants to be expressed, it wants to be given purpose, and to allow that purpose to be expressed and actualized in the real world. This is why self-sabotage and intrusive thoughts and things like this happen. Self-sabotage is essentially what happens when a part of your personality is warning you against something that you're not listening to, so it barges in and makes decisions for you because it needs to get heard and respected. This is proof of how important it is to have every part of you listen. This is the same thing that happens with intrusive thoughts. When you have a part of yourself that you're not listening to that has an important message for you, it will fucking bang on the door and break through to your conscious mind, so you have to listen to it. This is how hard your mind will work to make sure that all of you is actualized. However, a lot of us don't know really that that's what's happening. And so we have these experiences of self-sabotage, we have these experiences of intrusive thoughts or despair, but we don't really know where it's coming from or what to do about it. So, what do we do about it? According to Kierkegaard, what he recommends doing is finding something called a passion, which you could also use it as a purpose, essentially something meaningful and worthwhile to start organizing your life around. Now, Kierkegaard generally pointed to God for this, and so this is the point where I'm essentially going to start deviating from Kierkegaard's philosophy and start integrating some of my own personal philosophies that I find really bring this home, make it accessible and practical and useful in a way that you can actually really use. So I actually want to use the Jungian definition of God. And in order to illustrate this, I'm going to share with you my favorite quote of all time that I live my life by. And it's a quote from Carl Jung, and it goes like this: "If you follow that which is most alive in you, it will lead you to God, even if it doesn't seem like it." Now, I'm going to break this quote down into 3 distinct parts because it really illustrates what we're talking about here, and then I'm going to tell you what to do about it. So the first part of the quote is, if you follow that which is alive in you. Now, this is really important because the things that are alive in you, the things that you have a natural, genuine interest, affinity, excitement, and desire to pursue, those are the things that are unique to you. Those are the things that come from the true self that you despair when it can't be actualized. And it's really important to know this because all those things, they come from somewhere beyond your conscious choice. All the most important things about who you are as an individual, you don't really get to choose. You don't get to choose what you're interested in. You don't get to choose what you're passionate about. You don't get to choose what you care about. You don't get to choose who you love. You don't get to choose any of this shit. The only choice you get is about whether or not you're going to follow these things wherever they go. So if you follow that which is alive in you, you're following the part of you that exists beyond conscious choice. Something inside of you that is naturally drawn to things in your environment, to expressions, to creative endeavors, to building something. These are the things that are just intrinsic to you as an individual. And so the next part of the quote is, if you follow that which is most alive in you, it will lead you to God. Now, we know that when Carl Jung talks about God, what he's really talking about is the self. The true self that Kierkegaard is talking about bringing out as the antidote to despair. So the idea is, if you follow all those things that are naturally and intrinsically alive in you, if you follow that path wherever it leads, it will lead you to your true self, because it is your true self that has that natural affinity towards those things beyond your conscious choice. Okay, so now for the last part of the quote. The last part of the quote is honestly what I think to be potentially the most important part. If you follow that which is most alive in you, it will lead you to God, even if it doesn't seem like it. The even if it doesn't seem like it part is absolutely essential and very easy to overlook, because I see this all the time in my shadow integration courses and with my clients. What happens is you tell people to follow that which is alive in them, but due to social conditioning, trauma as a kid, having to live with your family and all kinds of stuff, maybe you don't have a healthy relationship with that which you truly desire most. Maybe for whatever reason, you've got the idea that it's not okay to be your true self. Maybe you've got the idea that it's dangerous to be your true self. Maybe you've got the idea that it's irresponsible or whatever. So you've got all these reasons to not be your true and genuine self. So when these things speak to you and from you from outside of your choice, this natural aliveness, it's very easy to judge it. It's very easy to be like, okay, yeah, cool, that sounds exciting, but like, is that practical? Is that good? Is that spiritual? Is that altruistic? Is that respectable, blah, 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 blah. It's easy to hold all these external metrics up against that which is most alive in you and try and use your conditioned mind to judge what the contents of your soul. So the idea behind follow it even if it doesn't seem like it is you have no idea where these things are going to lead, but you know where they come from. And so the question is, do you really trust that part of yourself? Are you really willing to see where your natural aliveness takes you, even if you can't see the path forward, even if your logical mind says that's really kind of weird? And I'll give you an example of what this looks like in real life. So I was in my coaching business for probably 6 years before I really started making any money or getting really any traction of like an audience online or anything like that. And it was because I was not following my aliveness. I didn't trust my aliveness. I thought that being a successful entrepreneur, business person was something that I wasn't. Even though I had a natural desire to be that, I felt like that was something that other people are and I have to learn how to do what other people are doing. So I judged my aliveness, I kept it hidden, and I simply did what all the experts told me to do. And if you can't guess, that wasn't very satisfying and didn't really get me anywhere. What did start to get me somewhere is once I started going with my own personal aliveness. I remember I was sitting in a hostel in Tokyo, kind of thinking back on my life and being like, you know what? This isn't actually all that fun anymore. I'm not enjoying myself. So fuck it. I'm just going to do what I want to do. I'm going to start making the content that I want to make. I'm going to start enjoying myself and have that be the highest priority and then just let whatever happens, happens. I was willing to follow my aliveness, even if it didn't make sense. And that is when I decided to start making memes. That is when I looked around at the coaching space and my industry in general and saw, you know what? Nobody's making the content that I want to make. So let me just make the shit that I wish someone else would make. Let me do what makes me happy and makes me feel alive. And as a result, my page blew the fuck up. I had all these huge accounts sharing my content. I started making way more money. I started being taken seriously. I don't know. And this is where the idea of even if it doesn't seem like it comes in. I had no reason to think that me making memes would be what made people start to take me seriously. My logical mind would have told me that that doesn't make any goddamn sense. But I did it anyway. And turns out that's what had people take me seriously. It opened up this whole new marketing structure that other people have actually copied from me with a lot of success. So because I was willing to follow my aliveness, I broke the mold, did something no one else had ever done before, and had a lot of success as a result. Now, when you start to explore your aliveness, there are going to be different levels of things that excite you. And here's how I've organized mine. It took me a little while to decide that I was going to go into coaching. I had a lot of other things I wanted to do. I was working on music festivals for about 5 years and really having a good time there. I wanted to become a musician, and I was throwing parties at nightclubs in San Francisco. All of these things were really fun, and I really liked them, and they could have become really happy and satisfying and fulfilling life paths for me. But what I had to do was trial and error. I tried all the things that brought me excitement and aliveness, and what I did was gauge how much natural desire there was for me to follow through with these things. I tried throwing parties at nightclubs. It was really fun, but ultimately the scene wasn't really healthy and I didn't want to be in there long term. I really like making music, but I'm not very good at it, and I don't have a natural desire to get good enough at it to turn it into a life path. However, when it came to coaching, I'm naturally obsessed with that. I think about psychology and philosophy all the time anyway, which means I have an unlimited amount of content to make. I enjoy making the content. I like talking to people. I like watching their lives transform. And this is something I could genuinely obsess over to the point of creating a life for myself. So I prioritized and created a hierarchy based on what was most alive in me. And coaching was at the top. I also like fashion design, so I make my own clothes. I like making music. And these are all supplementary interests that make my life more fulfilling. If all I had was coaching, I'd probably get bored. But I have all these other things that bring me aliveness, that create the wholeness of who I am. So when you see me walking down the street, you are seeing an embodied version of my purpose with all of my other interests integrated and bringing me the most happiness and satisfaction that I know how to generate at this point in my life. And so this also goes into another idea that I want to introduce you to from a German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche. And it's an idea called the organizing idea. And basically what this is the idea that if you find an aim high enough, something that you genuinely love, something that genuinely excites you and truly brings you that sense of aliveness, and it's the thing that brings you the most aliveness, if you find that, then what happens is this really beautiful and amazing internal process where your internal worlds and external worlds start to organize around that thing. It gives all the different parts of your personality something to rally around. Because again, every single part of your personality wants to be seen, it wants to be validated, it wants to be understood, it wants to be expressed, and it wants to have its purpose fulfilled in your life. And another beautiful thing about this internal psychological structure that most people don't really understand is even though you have all these conflicting drives and ideas inside of your own mind, they actually all have one thing in common. They all want you to have the best life possible and to be as expressed and authentically actualize as you can possibly be. They just all have different opinions on how you're going to go about doing that. The part of you that wants to work really hard to produce things knows that if you want a good life, you have to work hard and create it. And the part of you that wants to rest and do absolutely nothing knows that if you work all the fucking time and never play or rest or recharge, you're going to burn out and your life's going to suck. For a lot of people, these look like opposing ideas and opposing drives, but if you look at the commonality and the fact that they all have one thing in common, which is giving you the best life possible, you find the commonality and you find the organizing structure that they can all rally around. And so when you lead from that genuine sense of aliveness in yourself, what you're essentially doing is saying, all right, this is our dominant drive. This is the highest thing I can aim for. This is what I want to integrate all of the different parts of my personality in service of. And so when that happens, more and more of you gets integrated in the service of feeding your aliveness. Literally more life force starts flowing through you. You have more energy, you become happier, you become more fulfilled, you become more confident. Your life has purpose and structure and meaning, which gives you all the dopamine and all the really good shit that keeps you going. So when you have an organizing idea based on aliveness inside of you, it gives your life structure, order, meaning, and something to do with your life. So at this point, the question really becomes, what is most alive in you? And would you be willing to follow that wherever it leads, even if it doesn't make sense? Even if it doesn't seem like it's going to lead you somewhere worth going, would you go there anyway? That's a question that takes a lot of courage and takes a lot of commitment, and it honestly takes a lot of faith that in there somewhere is a version of you worth being. It takes a certain kind of faith that there is something in you worth bringing out into the world, regardless of what it looks like. And this is the gateway to true, genuine, authentic being. Now, obviously, we started this talking about Kierkegaard and the distinction between the finite and the infinite. So the solution is going to be different depending on which side of the spectrum you land on. If you're the type of person who's stuck in the finite, you may not even be aware of what is alive in you. You may be so stuck in your rational mind that this idea of aliveness maybe doesn't even make sense or seems foolish. But if you're watching this far in the video, I'm assuming there's something inside of you telling you that there may be more to this. And if that's the case, what you have to understand is if you cannot sense and feel and get into relationship with that which is alive in you, it's because you don't actually want to. If you wanted to, your mind would show it to you. If you don't want to, your mind will keep it hidden. It's really as simple as that. And there's a million reasons that somebody stuck in the finite would want to block these things out, right? Like I know people in my life that don't allow access to that part of their personality because it's illogical. And a lot of times highly logical people need to keep themselves in a logical frame because that's what kept them safe as kids. So emotions, inspiration, creativity, things like that occur to them as dangerous because it gets them out of their rational mind that kept them safe as kids. If you want to start diving into that, you need to understand that there's a half of your personality that you're keeping hidden. And you're keeping it hidden because you're probably scared of something. So what would scare you about knowing your inspiration? What would scare you about knowing the infinite potential of who you become? What exactly is scary about that? And can you make a plan to deal with that? If you can address that and integrate that fear, then all of a sudden your aliveness will start to show up for you. Then it's a matter of following it and continuing to integrate the obstacles to it. If you can do that, then you will finally have enough data to use that logical brain that you're so good at using to start to extrapolate the data points. You look for which one brings you the most aliveness. You look for which one's the most fun, which one you're the most obsessed about, and you start to create a hierarchy. And once you create the hierarchy, you structure your life around that. Next thing you know, you're locked into the organizing idea that's going to give your life and psyche structure. Now, if you're on the other side and you're more stuck in the infinite, where you see all the infinite potential of who you become, you get romanticized with that, but you don't know how to structure it and organize it and turn it into something meaningful that you can act on. A lot of times this happens, again, because of fear. A lot of times people fear the structured, organizational part of their minds because, well, there's a million different reasons you could fear that, but a lot of times it comes down to that part of them being overbearing. A lot of times people were born into strict households where they had these sets of rules that were kind of oppressive to them and bearing down on them a lot. So they said, you know what, I don't want to deal with that oppressive bullshit. Instead, I want to go over here into the infinite where everything's free and I get to play and I get to be whoever I am. If that's the case, what you're really dealing with is an internal oppressive pusher. And so you need to understand why that part of you is pushing you so fucking hard. What's it afraid of? What does it think if it doesn't push you? What does it think is going to happen? And can you make a plan for that so that part of you can relax? And then you can start to gain access to the part of your mind that will allow you to organize and structure all that infinite potential into something meaningful for you as an individual. So if you can successfully do either of these things, starts with understanding which side of the polarity you're on. You're either stuck in the infinite and you see way too many potentials and don't know how to actualize them, or you're so stuck in the mundane that you can't see the infinite potential enough to even create a hierarchy around it or even start to act on it. You need to understand first which side of the polarity you're on, and then you need to understand why you're on that side of the polarity. Again, this is really common. Most people that I talk to on some level are split between these two because that's just kind of how it happens. You have the two hemispheres of your brain, and as you grow up, people generally tend to side with one or the other because that fulfills their needs and keeps them safe as a kid. So you need to understand what you were naturally programmed to do, or unnaturally programmed, and figure out why you were programmed that way so that you can break out of it, start to gain access to the other side of your personality, create harmony between the two, actualize, bridge the gap between the infinite and the finite, understand who you really are, act on it, bring that into the world, and then you will have overcome despair, you will find confidence, you'll find happiness and fulfillment, and you will be a shining example of what human beings are actually capable of, lighting the way for the rest of us stuck in all this bullshit. So I hope this helps. I hope you see yourself in this. Let me know if you have any other questions. I love you. I'm Chris Roscoe. I'll see you next time.